Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining. This is our next to last open documentation hour of the year. But next week, if you're interested, we're planning to do, I don't know yet because we haven't decided on how we'll do this, but a kind of interactive quiz thing. I don't know, it might not even be a quiz. We were talking about this earlier, and maybe it'll be something where, you know, one of those kind of web portals where everybody gives their opinion on something, whether it's your favorite books of the year or whether it's on the use of the Oxford comma or sentence case for titles. I don't know, something fun anyway. But this week, I have to say thank you to Dimple for putting this all together. But we've got David who's here with us to talk about the work that he did for the Open Documentation Academy and adding some interactivity to restructured text. So I've just realized that I've probably not given David the correct credentials to do a presentation, but I've just done that now. So thanks so much. Well, thanks for your contributions, David. I know you've made a few, and thank you so much for offering to do this for us. I'm really looking forward to it. So I'm going to hand it over to you if you're ready.
Thank you, Graham. I'm going to just get right into it and share my slides. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, it looks great. Yeah, perfect. Nice orange.
All right. Yeah, I tried to use the Canonical, yeah. So, a few months back, I worked on an issue opened by Dimple. It was supposed to be like a POC for adding interactive elements to websites built with restricted text. Well, first of all, it's about me. My name is David Ekete, for those that don't know. I think the background in software engineering. So if that's guy, you could probably call me a documentation engineer. I contribute to like documentation of large open source projects like Next.js, Fastify, and mostly Coda. After work, I listen to diverse genres of music, explore art in all forms, and play some tennis. So we'll be discussing my process of solving this issue from drafting the design requirement documents to building the interactive component and to injecting the interactive component in the Sphinx -RST page. So first, at first glance, the issue looked like something that would be simple, but on further research looking into it, it required a little more work than I had expected. The first challenge was like creating an interactive element that fits into documentation. Dimple described the issue well enough to give me like a basis for the design. So using the issue description as a basis, I drafted a design requirement document for a designer that contained the key features, user flow, components, example commands, deliverables, and extensive notes for the designer in relation to the command I used an example. So I could share these slides after because I added a link to the finished requirement documents, and the results are the little image you can see at the end of this at the end of this slide. Then there was a possible improvement I could have done, but I couldn't finish that feature due to some engineering limitations. The interactive element is a drop-down flow code snippet generator where you can select the commands, say environments, like different environments, instead of like having to like repeat the commands over and over again. You could have one single code block that has the environments embedded. So for the users, while using documentation, you can just select the environment you're using and copy the code seamlessly. So having this kind of style introduces one issue. The users can select incompatible commands. For example, somebody can select Node 16 for a different bridge that it does not support. So to solve this, I introduced a feature in the design requirement document that checks if the command is correct, but I was not able to implement it due to engineering constraints. But I left it here as a possible improvement that anybody could take up if they feel up to the task. So building the interactive components, this step actually involved writing the source files that implemented the design, included a HTML file to structure the components, a CSS file to style it, and a JavaScript file to implement the interactive parts of the components. I left a link to the source files in this code pen in the slides. Let me know if you want the slides after the show. I would send it to everybody. Then injecting the interactive components into the Sphinx RST page. Well, the source files, as you know, were not written in RST. So Sphinx by default would not be able to parse those. But however, like Sphinx provides like a raw directive that allows you to inject things like HTML, latex, things that are not in RST or MD, depending on which flavor of Sphinx you're using. So, and they also allow you to include files, which is cleaner because like the HTML was a lot. Like I can't imagine putting all that HTML in one page. So the file option was a very handy feature. So using the file, I added a link to the HTML page, and the HTML contained links to the JavaScript and CSS. So JavaScript and CSS source files need to be stored in the right locations to ensure that they are properly loaded during the build process. And as a base for this issue, I was using Canonical's documentation starter pack. So using that, the right places for the files to be were in this sp files /sphinx static/css directory. That's for the CSS files, and the JavaScript files would be in the scripts directory in the same directory, but the scripts folder doesn't exist by default, so I had to create one. So these files being there, the next step was to kind of register them in the conf.py. Dimple helped with that because at some point I was stuck because I felt like I had done everything, but the CSS and JavaScript were not rendering properly. So thank you, Dimple, for helping out with the linking of the files. So this was the last issue, and I was able to get the interactive elements to render completely on a Sphinx page, and this was the final results. So the final results. So yeah, we have a. I would have loved if we were able to implement the check feature, but yeah, I'll leave that to the community. So this was final result, and yeah. So thanks for listening. You can connect with me on X at David Ekete, on LinkedIn at David Ekete too. Thank you everyone for your time.
Thanks, David. That was brilliant. If anybody would like to ask any questions, please go ahead or put your hand up. Or type.
It's just really fantastic work, David. It makes me think. I just think, oh, how can I use this? You know, I don't, I guess, have an immediate use case that comes to mind, but it makes me excited to kind of look at my documentation and think, you know, how might I use this in specific examples? So I think it's a really fantastic contribution.
Thank you, Shane.
This might be a naive question, but could I ask how you programmed the logic that does this?
Logic that copies the code or changes
yeah.
Okay, so it's more of a UI thing. So we have about 3 drop downs, each representing a command. So the command, you have to like fill in the options for the command, say Node versions or Python versions. You can do Python 1, 2, 3, or Node 16, 17, 18, 19. Then each time the user changes the drop down, I update the UI, the entire UI. And then when they copy, I take the current state of the UI and add it to their clipboard.
I see. Is it possible to, for example, in the options for a URL, generate a specific example output? Could you, for example, sorry. Well, maybe also within a page, if you were saying, if you select this option, then these arguments appear.
Yeah, it's possible.
And Sally is asking, how long did it take to implement this? Because she's wondering, because she could use it to replace something in her docs.
Well, since it was the first time, designing it took a bunch of time, like a lot of time. That was actually the main issue. But aside the design, it probably take a day or less. I'm working on making it to be extensible, so like it will take just minutes to implement. But right now, it's really vendor locked, so it might take like a few hours to implement. But if I'm done with library and building, it should take a few minutes or so. It should just be like adding a new directive to your doc, just simple as dash raw, and then you'd have the directive elements.
Any questions from anybody else?
This is probably an obvious question and an annoying question. How easy?
Yes, Sally, probably.
How easy would it be to implement this for Markdown-based documentation that we have?
Oh, it's the same thing. It's the same. This is just using RST. It's the same principle. So it would work for Markdown the same way it works for RST.
So can I use the current implementation in Markdown, or does it have to be adapted a little bit?
No, I use the current implementation for Markdown. It does not have to be adapted anyway.
Okay. Great.
And what were those engineering constraints that you faced when you tried to verify the chosen, whether the chosen options are correct or not?
Okay, so to verify if the commands are correct, there were like a lot of edge cases to manage. Like it got to the point where like I was considering adding LLMs to the mix, and like that was going to be too complicated for the issue. So I left it alone for a while. I might actually go back to it. I'm trying to do it without adding AI or LLMs to it, because that might be tasking and expensive, because of like I have to like make API calls to OpenAI and stuff like that. So I'm trying to figure out how to do it without those. Because checking the commands, if the correct commands are correct, there are like a lot of permutations. For example, there are like 50 ways that command can be wrong. Like you'd have to account for each of the 50 conditions and provide reasonable error messages for each of them. Now, think about a command with about 1,000 ways combinations could be wrong. And the more the number of variables increase, the higher the number of conditions required to go as much as 1 million ways this command could be wrong. So I need to work around that.
So if we already know a very limited set of options for each of those parameters, and we know what is correct, we don't have to search for it. I mean, if someone already knows it, then can we do it in an easy way?
Yes. If it's already known, let's say there are just 3 ways it can be wrong or 5 ways it can be wrong. Yes, we can easily implement that feature.
So the examples you gave, David, seem to be, someone wants to copy a command maybe to run in their terminal, and they can customize the command before they copy it. But I guess another use case might be, we have a code block that it demonstrates, if you use this command, it will generate this output. But we could change with your implementation, we could change a flag or an argument, and then that could also change the output that we have in the code block, possibly. So
yes,
the user could change the input in our code block, and that would also change the UI to show a different output.
Yeah, the first iteration of the design actually had what you're saying as implementation, where you change the entire code block. Then more iterations, we now change from code block to particular text inside the code block, but code block works too.
What was the most challenging part of what you had to do?
The
Was it
design.
the design?
It was the design. Yes, the design was very difficult. Like it was very difficult. Like I had a lot of back and forth with the designer because like this is something that does not exist. Like we literally had to bring it to life. It's not in existence. We had to create it from nothing.
How did you decide that the design needed to come first?
Well, like I said, it was supposed to be something you can add to documentation. It couldn't be any interactive element. It had to be documentation specific.
Yeah.
So yes, me and Dimple had like a whole back and forth. Like it took months to get design, to get a working design. It took months to get working design.
And how did you decide on the color scheme, that it should be black background and the colored?
Okay, yeah. So the background was all my designer. I wish he was there. I would give him a shout out. He decided on the colors to separate the variables from the normal text.
Is there anything that you do differently, David, if you had to do something like this again? What was like the key takeaway from it?
Okay, key takeaway. Well, I learned a lot about user experience because, like I said, design was the most difficult thing. So I learned a lot about user experience in docs. So, yeah, I wouldn't do anything differently, but I would do. Instead of using like this code component, I'll probably look for a different way to add interactivity to documentation. I saw one I found really interesting. Like when you hover over a link, instead of taking you to the next page, it creates a small model of the link in that page. I feel like that's very good for UX, so that the user doesn't get distracted because like attention spans are like all-time lows. So getting the reference out like in the page directly helps you to maybe scan the information you're looking for and then continue reading instead of going to the next page and maybe getting lost in a rabbit hole. You get the information you're looking for in that page. So it was really about user experience in docs. So
And I mean, at Canonical actually, where there's some expectation on us to influence design so that the task of documentation isn't so complicated or redundant if something can be improved at the design stage. Do you think it would be the more things you design like this, that design stage becomes easier? Is there a way are the mistakes that you made early on in formulating the design that you wouldn't make if you were to do this again? And is that the best thing you can do, or have you got any advice on design?
Okay, designs, mistakes in designs. Okay, first, initially I didn't create a design requirement document, so I feel like that is one thing I learned on this journey because like it was easier to document my thoughts and pass it along. Because if you start writing something, you notice the holes in what you're saying. So before I used to just have calls with designer but then I started writing the design requirement documents, and there were several iterations of that document. Like I kept updating and like there was a lot of iterations to make it better up until the point that designer could take text and turn it into designs. So yeah, since I learned, that was what I learned. So like it won't take as much time because I'll just get straight to writing the documents immediately and then start the iterations there instead of a whole back and forth with the design team and stuff like that. Yeah. Sally, you said if we could use information users to complement the comment they're looking for. Do you I don't seem to understand your question, Sally.
Yeah, I'm sort of partly thinking out loud, I think. So we've had some discussions before about like ways that we can help users to get to the content that they're looking for. And we've talked about things like being able to tag content, for example, security, cloud, this sort of thing. But at the moment, we don't really have a way in Sphinx to be able to do that, for users to be able to select a tag and say, like, this is what I'm interested in, and then kind of get shown the content that they're looking for. So I guess I'm wondering, like, is this something that could be presented outside of a code block in such a way that a user could, for example, say, well, I'm interested in like Google public cloud, so they can select like Google, and they want to set up something to do with security, so they can select security, and like essentially kind of get themselves to the content that they want without having to like travel through a whole bunch of links first.
Oh, okay, so you mean like tags that help filter out the pages that are not related to what they're looking for?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I think that's very possible.
You'd basically be generalizing the implementation to apply to
All the pages.
the whole page or multiple
Yes.
pages. Yeah.
Yeah, it will work. You have to like create to achieve that. You probably have to create an index first. It's like a whole. It's still. I feel like every problem should start from the design stage. So, Sally, if you're willing to like create an issue for it on the Open Documentation Academy repo, I'll be willing to take a look at it.
Okay, cool. I'll do that. Thanks.
I feel like I'm going to ask the kind of devil's advocate question. And maybe you don't have to answer this, David. Maybe if somebody else has an opinion on it. I really like these modest, minimal, interactive elements in documentation. It gives me something to play with, and it breaks up. The word that comes to mind is the monotony of the words. However, I also think it possibly breaks or challenges the purity of what we're trying to do in describing the facts of what something does and is and how it works. Do you think that's the case? Do you think this is a slippery slope where we're just going to turn everything into like an interactive playground, or do you think there are legitimate ways of having this in a minimal way?
Okay. Yes. Really, I had thought along these lines because recently, while I was working on this, I started coming across a lot of interactive articles on the web. Like they've been around as far back as 2011, and yes, they actually might distract the user from what they're trying to do, but I think that it helps with the learning too, because like you said, it breaks the monotony of it's like images. It's like saying that images would distract the users or GIFs would distract the users. In reality, it really breaks the concentration. But like I feel like yes, this is like something that the reader needs to continue. Like, okay, attention spans are really low now. So if there's something to break and return, which the interactive elements could be a tool for breaking and returning attention spans, then yes, I feel like this is something we should embrace, not fight, but in a minimal way, because it can quickly get overcrowded. I can imagine like websites that have like up to interactive elements everywhere. The user would like it would cause a cognitive load, and they might not be able to digest the information that they try to digest.
Yeah, I think your point about attention spans is a really good one. It quite scares me that, you know, if we're going to have to write documentation for people with 30-second attention spans.
And on the other side, like when a person leaves the documentation page, I mean, I guess conventionally what we would have done to document the kind of examples that David showcased the component with, we would have, you know, something in angular brackets, and then someone would copy and paste the command, and then they would go to that point and they would cancel it out and they would type in something. I hate doing that. Like it causes a lot of friction, especially if you have to do it multiple times. Which leads me to my next question, I guess. If you have a document, and it kind of relates to what Sally said earlier, but if you've got a document where you select in the top code block your architecture in a code block, can it be so that that change that the user makes cascades down to subsequent code blocks, so that they make the choice in the first code block, but they never have to make a choice again? Does that make sense?
No, sorry, can you repeat your question?
Well, we have these. Sometimes in our documentation, we have these tabbed interfaces where someone makes a choice between two options, A and B, in the first tabs, in the first set of tabs. And when they make the choice B, it automatically converts all the other tabs in the page to B also. So someone makes the choice once.
Yeah, okay.
And I can't think of a code snippet example right now, but I'm thinking like, someone enters a specific flag or variable or something in a first code block, and then that populates other code blocks in the page with that. I think Graham called it, let's say, a global variable.
Okay, are you asking if that's possible with interactive
Yes.
elements? Yes, it's very
Yes.
possible. Yes, it is.
Okay.
So how might that be done? Would it require adding to what you've already got, or is it already aware of, like, if something was set for I don't know what it would be in JavaScript.
Okay, so the example I currently have is very vendor locked. It was meant to be a POC. It's very vendor locked, so it can't do anything aside from what it currently does. But what Shane suggested can be done, but that would require restructuring the page and changing all the code directives into interactive directives instead, and then linking them to the global variable. Damilola, the entire doc page is already rendered as HTML.
So it would require injecting. Sorry.
So I know the entire doc page is already rendered as HTML. What I'm saying is in the case of the global variable, whereby let's say at the top of the documentation page, you just select an option and automatically all the code blocks in the doc page changes to a particular kind of code. Would that be like a Markdown file, or will it be even in the source code an HTML file on its own?
So okay, it should be Markdown. Then you probably have something like a global variable that is holding the value of what changes. So when it changes, just update that global variable and then it renders the same way. Do you understand?
Sure, thank you.
I feel like we're really giving you a grilling on this, David, but it's I think it's because you've captured our imaginations with what you're doing, and it also looks so good. I hope you don't mind.
No, it's fine. I enjoy answering questions.
Has anybody else got any questions they'd like to ask David on what the work that he's done, or maybe the interaction that he had with the Academy? Please go ahead if you do. Have you got any ideas of what you'd like to work on next, David?
I'm currently working on an issue on Coda that has to do with documentation pages for the new Canonical for developer documentation. I have 3 issues assigned to me on that, so that's what I'm currently working on, and I may or may not add some interactive elements to the page. If I do, I'll let everybody know.
And you've done quite a few tasks. Is there anything that you think we could do to improve the way that it is?
Currently, no. But the issues, some of them, they're not, well, everything's actually great currently, but the issues, they're not a lot. There are not a lot of issues. So, for example, now for a few months, there haven't been any new issues. And I know like there are actually internal documentation issues. So I'm just appealing to the team at Canonical. If you guys could like shift some of your issues to us, like we are here, we're really trying to learn. And I feel like this really gives a lot of people hands-on experience. So like having more issues to work on would be nice. The current structure works very well, and the collaborators are very helpful. Shane was very helpful. Dimple was very helpful. Robert was very helpful. I haven't seen him in a while, so I don't know. He's not around. He hasn't been around in a while.
There are quite a few people that have been on a Christmas break, and it's also been, it's been. We'd love to add a lot more issues. That's something that we're trying to make a high priority for early next year. And as Sally's saying, Ubuntu server will be added to code, which is going to be a lot of things. Demilola.
Yes, thank you for the input, David. I really appreciate. This is amazing. This is an amazing contribution. It's kind of as I put it, it kind of plays on my imagination and makes me think of something I've always wanted us to do, which is like, I will really love a situation whereby we find a way to add more like coding challenges to some of our issues at the Open Academy, because I just feel in a way it helps with our creativity compared to writing in a way, in the sense like it allows you to like do a lot more research, right? Especially when you're like customizing documentation, because we understand like for each documentation, you have like different use case, different users you're kind of trying to satisfy, right? I know like the starter pack, it's kind of reaching its maturity. But I would say like a situation whereby we have code challenges, not necessarily maybe we have to implement them on the starter pack, but maybe something to work in. It could be like some futuristic feature, just something to help the creativity of our contribution.
Thanks. I really like the idea of. I really like the idea.
Sometimes I worry about like creating too many issues, that like, issues might get lost, just given the number of contributions that exist, the number of contributors that are able to handle issues currently. So I tend to be very selective with what I put into code as an issue, but maybe I need to change that approach.
Well, yeah, I mean, my philosophy has been to try and get as many issues on there as possible, but I am aware that that could make us a bottleneck. And also, we should. I don't feel like we should be, but we don't want to be the only people reviewing people and helping people make their contribution. So if anybody else wants to be involved in that side, you're more than welcome. I've always wanted to have like 100 issues on there, just so that there's a huge diversity. So there would be some programming tasks or challenges or design challenges, all the kind of things that we typically talk about in this hour, because it not only does that kind of attract more people to get involved because they may be interested in some things that others aren't. It also demonstrates the huge variety of work that we all have to do as part of our jobs, and very, very little of it is adding apostrophes and putting full stops on things. I'd really love to do that, like early next year. There's been I misunderstood the discussion going on in the commentary about the tabbed views that we use in Discourse and the ones in Sphinx, and whether they work with each other. I really don't like the Discourse implementation of the tabbed views that we've got, if that's what they're called. But then some documentation sets really use them effectively. I mean, everybody kind of comments on Stripe documentation for the language comparisons that they have, but I do think that works really well in the developer documentation. Is there anything you'd like to ask us, David, or anybody else here?
No, nothing.
I think maybe if nobody else has any questions, I'm gonna stop the recording, and then if anybody wants to ask anything else in relation to anything, really, please go ahead. But I will say thank you very much, David, for your work on the Academy, for this interactive element, and for doing this presentation and being so convivial with us on our sort of questions. So thank you.
No problem. I enjoyed it.